Let's talk about Facebook. They've been in the news, well, often, nearly always, for the wrong reasons in recent months. But they went to war, it would seem, with the Australian government very recently. But the Australian government said they had to actually start paying for their links to news websites on their social media pages. Facebook said, well, we won't provide any links to news pages then, and just cut off all supplies, even to, frankly, some very important emergency news sites, including the fire service and COVID information from the Australian government. Well, after the Australian government hit back, it would appear yesterday that Facebook decided to blink first. They said they're going to restore news content for Australian users in the coming days. This after the government made some last-minute changes to a draft law, forcing Facebook and Google to pay some local publishers for their digital material. But what lessons are there here for us in the UK? Let's talk to Baroness Nikki Morgan. She's former Culture Secretary and a Conservative peer. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
It's a very complicated story, this, and it's one of those ones it takes 3 paragraphs to tell the story. In the meantime, I mean, I suppose the first thing is who started this battle first? Was it the Australian government that basically said, right, we're going to start getting some money for these news organisations, or was it the news organisations who demanded that they got payment? Because this seems to be in a battle that came out of nowhere.
Well, I suspect it was the news organisations realising that their content was being used all over these social media platforms and being seen by them, and they were not getting money for it. What would happen then is, obviously, I suspect that's raised with the government. The government says, yeah, actually, you've got a good point here. And we know, because there is a challenge here in the UK as well, particularly for many smaller media organisations, if people are getting their news and their links via the social media platform, they're not going direct to the websites of the newspapers, and therefore the newspapers are missing out on money and income and advertising revenue, which is obviously very important. So I think the Australian government put the law forward, and then, as you say, Facebook and Google said, well, hang on a second, we don't like this, and we're going to flex our muscles. Now, Google obviously decided to enter commercial agreements with various Australian news broadcasters and outlets. Facebook, as you say, decided to see if they could be a bit tougher, and then obviously agreements being reached between the two. I think the lesson here for us, though, is these companies need to be regulated in different ways. I mean, there's different things. We're talking particularly about news content here, but there's obviously the issue around the harmful material that these platforms will often carry. And then also, I think there's real concern about the amount of data they're hoovering up. So issues around competition law. So this should not be that the Australian government is not going to regulate. Yep. It's just that obviously they've reached a particular agreement, and they wanted Facebook to reach commercial agreements with news outlets, and that's what seems to have happened.
Yeah, indeed. I've never understood this idea that somehow the internet should be this wild west and should be immune to any sort of regulation. Otherwise, we have no freedom of speech. Obviously, there's going to be a different level of regulation with people uploading whatever they want on platforms like Facebook, as there would be, for instance, the content I can put out on my show here with Ofcom regulation in the UK. But some balance needs to be found, doesn't it? And again, in this case, it was about who gets paid for content, because it wasn't just if I put a link in a tweet to Times newspaper, I don't have to pay the Times for that, because the Times page comes up and whatever advertising or whatever can come up, or people can get an option to buy a subscription. But that's different from what they were doing here. They were using that content, monetizing it themselves, but not actually paying for it to be produced. A lot more people who don't own large multinational media corporations would be more concerned, as you say, about issues like the data and the harmful material, but also about censorship and companies like Facebook picking and choosing when they're a platform with, nothing to do with me, Gov, someone just put it on our platform, and being able to, for instance, take down Donald Trump's Facebook page, censoring organisations and censoring even discussion of COVID policy, picking and choosing what they are whenever they want, whenever it suits them.
Absolutely. I mean, these are very large global companies, and they have obviously got billions of users, and of course to Google has become a verb basically, and of course many of us have relied on Facebook to find out what friends and family are doing in the course of the last 12 months when we've not been able to see them. But I think we have absolutely reached a stage where these large influential companies need to be regulated, as you say, across a variety of different areas of their operations, in the same way that we've seen in the past with other large companies, whether it's environmentally polluting companies or it might be the tobacco companies, where they resisted regulation to start off with, and then actually they have realised that there is going to be regulation, and the question is going to be how they're regulated. But you're absolutely right. The UK government, we've got a Prime Minister who is a former journalist himself, very, very conscious of the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and that trying to find that balance, as you say. But these companies have accepted now, with the action taken against Donald Trump, I think, that they are publishers. They're not just platforms, and they do have a responsibility relating to the content that they allow to go out and how they're using the data. Exactly as you say, how they're monetizing our data to make profits for themselves.
Can I also ask you, as a former government minister and often dealing with women's issues, it's about a story in one of the papers today about a domestic violence charity for women victims called Rise. They've been working in Brighton and Hove for more than 25 years, running a refuge and a helpline for women seeking help after violence in the home. They have now lost a £5 million public contract with their local council after the council said they wanted it to focus on more inclusive service provision, which basically means they needed to find more support for male survivors, either straight or gay, or trans people who sought their services, despite the fact this is a domestic violence charity for women. Should they lose their public funding?
Well, I would hope not. I mean, I think that absolutely. We're debating the domestic abuse bill in the House of Lords at the moment, and we know that there are issues in same-sex relationships. That we know that men can be victims of domestic abuse as well. But I think where a charity has been set up and has got probably long-term expertise in supporting women who are the victims of domestic abuse, I think it is concerning when the organisation doing the funding is trying to sort of move them away from their core purpose, their expertise, and using their funding stream to do that. A better way would be able to say, we see the potential there is an increase in these other types of offences. Are you an organisation that can help with this, or are there other organisations that we might want to work with as well?
But should a domestic violence charity for women, when women we know many of them will have been very traumatised by violence from men, and as you say, obviously men are also victims, and it could be women on women violence and women on men violence, and let's not pretend that it doesn't happen as well. But in this specific case, many of these women have been traumatised by men in their lives. To be in a refuge for instance, with other men, or indeed trans women who are biologically still men, that would be very traumatic for those women. Are you concerned, as a former Minister for Women, that women's needs, women's safety, our existence as a biological entity is being sort of wiped off the map by people who are desperate to want to be inclusive? Of course, no one's talking about people who are trans or gay or straight men, whoever they are, from not being able to access these services. But this total this desire to sort of write women off the map, does that concern you?
Yeah, it does concern me. I think it's as you say, people want to be inclusive, but they're going the wrong way about it. And we shouldn't be denying that there are, as we've said, other issues, and there are. But the majority of domestic abuse cases, sadly, is still women are the victims, and we've seen this in other areas as well, where people try so hard to be inclusive that they end up sort of losing sight of the original, in this case, the original reason for the funding for the charity, the expertise that it's built up, and I think that. But seems to me ministers are very alive to this, and I hope that in this case the local authority will rethink their funding decision.
Okay.